All right, recording is in progress. Um, so last time, which was 2 weeks ago, well,
Seems
three
like
weeks ago, I
forever.
guess, um, we talked about resentment and just barely even scratched the surface on a couple pages. But the one question that I ask, and I always ask it with step four, it's a very important question that Einstein asked, and the most important decision you ever make in your life is, do I want to live in a friendly or hostile universe? Do I want to live in a universe that is filled with anger, hostility, hatred, or do I want to, live in a universe that's filled with peace, love, and so forth? And a question like that, it's not really a question for a newbie or a drunk to answer right away because they don't under, they're not gonna have any idea what you're talking about, but for people that are in the process of doing the steps and moving forward with the steps, it makes sense. And also it's something you can ask anybody. I'm going to tell a quick story really quick, and I love this story. It's a good leader into what we're covering tonight. um, so there's this snake, and it climbs over a very sharp, saw, and it gets cut. And the snake is so angry for the cut, it wraps itself around the saw and tries to squeeze the life out of the saw. And with every squeeze, it feels more pain. Um, and it continues because it doesn't want to let go of the anger it has towards that saw for cutting it, and the pain it causes, and the pain continues to cause. So this refusing to let go, it eventually dies, and not knowing the whole time all he needed to do was let go. And step forward to being in that process. And instead, this that poor snake unfortunately lost his life and didn't even see it coming. And you know the thing about it is nothing eats a person away from the inside out like like anger, because it's such a paralyzing emotion. And it's capable of, think how fast it shifts your thinking. Or a person, how many times you've known someone and you see them, you think you know them, and you see them flip that switch. And one moment they're calm and serene, the next moment they're insanely raged. But resentment doesn't not only drives our thinking, it drives others right out of our lives. And it's kind of like this, and this is the way I like to say it, it's kind of like we carried around this bag of manure, and it's called the past. And what people, contained in that's what people have done to us, what people said to us, the bad things everybody did, negative emotions, my victim aspect, maybe some guilt that's thrown in there. And we stay bonded to those wounds of the past so much that we identify by those wounds. And we reach into that, it's like the quotes of reaching in that bag of manure, and we spread all over ourselves and wonder why people don't want to go near us. And that's the thing. I didn't realize that. And so we're stuck in the past, and rather than living in the present. And I like to explain the way Alan Watts explains it. It's deep, it's very good. You know, if if you're in a boat and it's heading up the river, you're standing at the back of the boat, what do you see behind the boat? You see something called the wake. And the wake is a trail left behind the boat. And it tells you the direction where the boat's going. And it, eventually fades too. Is it possible for that wake, the trail left behind, to make the boat go in a direction? It can't. It's just the trail left behind. It's the past. The wake doesn't make the boat go forward. Our trail left behind, our wake is our past. And one of the problems is we have a tendency to let our wake drive us forward, even that's, not intended for it to happen. And we let it happen, to determine where we're going next. So in the midst of a resentment, we fail to see the truth and let the past drive us. We blame stuff, um, that's in our wake. Why life isn't working for us, why that person said this. And the wake is our past. It's not made to make us go forward. We need to let it go. And we need to look deeply, into that past and examine to see the reason why we're going in our life's going in the direction it is. So in step four, we're looking back. We're looking back at our personal history so we can discover what caused our suffering, right? And look at that wake for what it is, but it's not as easy as make it sound there, and then what drives it, we take action on our past. When we take that action, it starts to fade, you know, meaning the wake left behind no longer determines our future and it's not there anymore. And, so to leave it, we must redo our hard wiring, so to speak. We must unlearn the way we looked at life. And we must, if you really want this and you really want to change, you must, process of 4 through 9 is this is the start of it. Howard, you want to comment on that we're going to be on page 64. Oh, you're muted. I don't know if you want to comment anything I said.
No, I'm anxious to see what page 65 looks like. I
Right,
haven't seen it in a
exactly.
long time.
So page 64, we got halfway through that paragraph last time we stopped, and then we're at the part of 64 where it says, in dealing with resentments,
Mm.
set them on paper. Now, in this book, we have promises and we have conditions. And the conditions is required to achieve something. So you put it on, the thing about it is what's so important about paper, putting it on paper, right? When you put it on paper, I believe the resentments right away start to lose their power. And, I always say this to people, and it sounds stupid and silly, but how do you can't see your nose on your face, very little. But how do you see your nose on your face? Or if you have a scratch in it, you have to look in the mirror, right? How do you see your thoughts? You can't. You got to put them on paper, right? Howard, do you want to comment on that at all? Or
Nope, nope,
it says
absolutely not.
we listed people, institutions, and principle with whom we were angry. It's very interesting there. Um, and here's the important thing here is I in Howard we sponsored quite a few people over the years, and that's all from God. And I don't know how many times people just think we're talking this resentment inventory is about people that are close to, the nearest people to us. It's so if you look up the word people, what it means, entire body of human beings, and it consists of community, tribe, nation, sexuality, or culture. You know, it's not just the people we know personally. It goes on, and it could be a type of person that you resent. It could be a whatever. And then it says institution. People leave this out a lot. Believe it or not, an institution is a society or organization, establishment, foundation, business, a long-term held custom practice. Maybe it's marriage, maybe it's something to do with politics. And a lot of people get stuck in politics and I had to let a lot of stuff go that I tried to fight for years in that aspect. And I can't let it get in my head. I don't rent stuff in my head anymore. But the institution is important in principle, and that's a belief system or morals, rules, laws, ethical standards, right? Right or wrong, government contact, type stuff. I mean, morals. Well, it could be the 12 steps, you know. You got anything you want to say on those three?
Yeah,
Tom?
yes. We're talking about the paragraph that we can't seem to get past on page 64 begins with the statement that resentment is the number one offender. And I think those of you who know me know that I'm always looking to define terms. And the term resentment means something very specific. We all have heard it, but did we really hear it? Resentment means RE means to do again, and sentiment comes from the French word for feelings. It comes from the Latin word sentire. which means to feel, to re-feel. So what we're being told here is that the re-feeling of certain things is a number one offender to us. And I'm harp on this because more often than not, if you go to a meeting and the topic is resentment, what do they talk about? They talk about anger. That's all they talk about. And anger is not resentment. Anger is a resentment. Fear is a resentment. Uh, Reviewing our sources of the harms that we've done to others, to look at the guilt and the shame that we've carried around, that is another form of resentment. So what I'm saying is that I believe that the fourth step in and of itself, in its entirety, is one big resentment list. Now, it's normal. I think it's expected to be confused because Bill himself does it. As we go through this chapter, Bill sometimes slips between the word anger and resentment. He does that all through the book. But when we're talking about it here, we're very specific because it starts out by telling us resentment is the number one offender, and then it gives us an assignment. And the assignment is we listed people, institutions, principles with whom we had resentments? No, with whom we were angry. So we're beginning to separate. We're beginning to take a part of resentment and let's take a look at it. And then when we're done with that, now we'll talk about sex and then we'll talk about fears. But we're going to start to grab things out of the resentment bowl. And it begins with anger. And I'm just saying that to clarify this because it's like I said, I think Bill's at fault because he switched those words around pretty well. But be that as it may, our first assignment is to do just that. And that's all we talked about for the last 2 weeks. It's let's make a list of people, principles, and institutions. And if I may, I never met an alcoholic who didn't know exactly who he was angry at. That is a given. But principles, but institutions maybe require a little bit more work, but I still don't think this is a big hurdle. You know, institutions are political parties, organized religions, uh, marriage, or education system, correctional system. But the one thing that I think takes a little bit more work that we don't spend enough time on is principles. Principles are things that are drilled into our heads as we grow up, that as we continue to age, cause us anger, cause us confusion, cause us conflict. For example, my folks taught me you never put a hand on another human being in anger. I believe in that. I raised my son that way. You never strike another person in anger. But when I was a kid, I was always the shortest kid in class. I was a chubby little kid. I had glasses and braces in the second grade, and I got picked on, and I never fought back. And while I felt I was doing the right thing, I was doing what my parents wanted, I also felt like a coward. So it caused me a lot of conflict and confusion and anger over the years. So that's a principle that I had to put down. We just covered a few weeks ago a principle that came right out of this book, the line, so our troubles we think are basically of our own making. There's a doozy of a principle that I didn't care for. And I'll give you one other one and then I'll leave it back to Steve. Is one of my guys put down on his principle list, all men are created equal. He's black. And that is not his story. Every time he hears that expression, the hair on the back of his neck stands up. It makes him angry because that was not his experience. So to him, all men are not created equal. And that's what we're talking about in terms of principles. Every one of us gets it from our parents. Real men do this, real ladies do that, that's what we're talking about in terms of principles.
You know, one of the things I wrote down in principles too was some things my mom would say that were kind of cliche-ish. And one thing she would say, wait till your father gets home.
Mm.
Then I knew the belt's coming out, I'm getting in trouble, you know, the old school parents, but I it wasn't the slogan I realized I resented. I resented that she was telling my dad what I was doing wrong and I was to get the punishment for it. Why can't she just, keep it to herself and, that type of stuff. It was deep. It was deep. See, also says here, we asked ourselves why we're angry. I don't think it's a question we woke up in the morning, asked ourselves, why am I angry today? You know, um, because anger is a presence of displeasure towards something or somebody. It can be an object, could be a person, whatever. Um, when we, when we hold on to that and don't let it go, that's where it becomes resentment. If you ask a person, they don't have no clue, you know. But the question is why are we angry? And you know, it, it it's going to tell us next, but I think Howard wants to throw something in there with this question.
Well, yeah, what are the things that Steve and I had agreed to do is we in doing the fourth step, there's grids and there's a number of variations on the theme on for grids. For example, most of us got the concept of grids from Joe and Charlie. When they started doing this, they turned the AA culture on its ear. They absolutely turned everything over when they came up with this kind of format. But within the format, there's still some differences. So rather than putting up a grid that I've used or a grid that Steve used, what we're going to try and do and over the next page or three is talk about what is being asked of us to put in these columns. So we've already got the first assignment. Make that list. There's column one. Don't need to be a genius to figure that out. And now he's going to tell us how to fill out the rest of those columns. And we asked ourselves why we were angry is the next one. That's what we do after we list the name. And he's going to give us an example of that in the next page. But that's what goes in the second column. And the third column is discussed in the next assignment. In most cases, it was our self-esteem, financial, pocketbook, ambitions, and so on. And I think I probably went beyond where I was supposed to go, but at least
Okay.
that's what we're talking about.
Because it says most cases is found that our self-esteem, we'll see that on the next page, our pocketbooks, ambitions, and some of these he's going to mention aren't on that page,
Yeah.
but um, and we'll explain about that. But
Mhm.
it says we're hurt or threatened, so so we're burned up. So here's the thing: is with instincts, um, when I have a resentment, you know, my instincts are hurt or threatened. There's something trying to take away my money. There's someone's trying to do this, or someone wants to take this away from me, right? And if I wind up harming someone, why do I harm someone? To satisfy that, to feel better, Why did you go up and tell somebody, you know, who did something wrong, the banker, because your money doesn't appear in there, blah, blah, blah because you wanted to feel you had to say it, even though it was fixed. You had to go off and tell them, you know. We did a whole huge
Mm.
10 instincts a few weeks ago back. Um, Someone's unmuted. We'll figure it out. But so our grudge list, we set aside our injuries. So a grudge list, it's just, we harbor ill feelings against the person for something they did or what we believe they did. And when it persists, with that to that level of resentment, it's funny is guys will tell me, I don't have any resentment, or the only person I ever harmed is myself, and which is completely laughable in my mind. So for guys like that, I give them this primer sheet. I'm just going to show it to you. This is not inventory. This is just to get the mind going and get it juggling a little bit. And it's nothing fancy. I used to have them do it on binder paper on this part, but I found by giving them something that's already written for them, the chances are they're going to do it. And what I use because it helps. I ask them to put down the people they're this is I gotta remember this is the guy who claims he has no resentments, who they're really mad at, you know. And I ask them to fill out. I ask them, what are the, and then I go, once they fill it out, and they got, a lot on there. I say, how many of those grudges goes years back? I say, well, then you got resentment. And then they go, oh. So I explained, and I have them take these names and move it over to their inventory. So it's a fishing exercise. Um, so we move those names over to the inventory, and I don't do this like I said for everybody, but it really works for, it's a game changer for some. I call it a primer sheet, and primers for paint, primers for fixing things, um, for digging up for information. So that was just I just wanted to share that what that looked like. It seems it's so simple. It's just I've also sponsored guys, and I know Howard has too, that I've had to write their 4 step with them because either they're illiterate or something like that, and or they're brain damaged. And this works good for people who have the brain damage and stuff like that from drinking. And they go, oh, okay, get it started from. But I'm not holding their hand either. So our grudge list set aside each name our injuries. What now he asks us questions here. This is where it gets interesting. Was it our self-esteem? Was there security or ambitions or personal relations been hurt or interfered with? Now, how many times is now what if someone walked up to you, even the shrink asked you that question and be like, what are you talking about? And you ever interfered with means to obstruct through force or threat, right? I'm going to interfere. I'm going to interfere with, Howard tonight. I'm going to cut him off in the middle of he's talking. That's I'm interfering with it. I'm obstructing something. And and what happens when we get a threat like that interfered with? We get a resentment, right? Especially if you hold on to
Mm,
it. Did you want to comment on that, Howard?
yeah, absolutely. Couple of things. Grudge list. To me, everything in column one is a grudge list. I love the list that Steve just mentioned. When I acquired a new sponsor a few years back, and we went to do the 4th step again, I said, I don't really can't think of too many people that I'm angry at. And he just kind of leaned back and he said, does anybody ever annoy you? There it is. It's a whole new world that opens up by just considering that word a little bit more. The people that annoy me. Annoying comes before anger, but comes before rage. But it's just that list of names. And what Steve just started to talk about, I think, is so, so important. This was it our self-esteem. Opposite each name was our injuries. What did they do to hurt us? Where did the hammer hit us? I'm angry at this person. Why? What did he do? He did something that affected my self-esteem, how I feel about me. He did something that affects my security. And security is threefold. We have physical security, which is my body. We have emotional security, which is a general sense of well-being. And we have financial security, the hip bank, our finances, our pocketbook. How about ambitions? Ambitions is not, oh, when I grow up, I want to be a fireman. Ambitions are simple tasks that I want to accomplish, and I couldn't because you did something that got in my way. You interfered with my plans. I wanted to go to a certain wedding, and I didn't go because this cousin of mine who I can't stand, he was going to be there. So my anger towards him affected my ambition. I couldn't go to this wedding. And all of these words that we're talking about in this particular section, some are spread out in this chapter, some are from the 12 and 12. If you really want to get a good overview of it, read in the 12 and 12 the first few pages of the essay on step 4. It's all about the basic instincts of life. Basic instincts are things we need to survive. They're God-given survival mechanisms, but sometimes they get blown out of proportion or they get hypersensitized. So somebody who robs me, right? Their sense of financial security may be out of whack. Their sense of personal relations may be out of whack, but something is out of proportion and they hurt me. So certain things of mine, certain basic instincts of mine have been hypersensitized. That's what we're talking about. Here's the simplest thing I could say. What I learned from this paragraph is that I cannot be angry at you unless you did something very specific that interfered with one of my basic instincts. You stepped on my toe. What toe did you step on? Was it the self-esteem toe? Was it the pride toe? Was it the emotional or financial or physical security toe? Was it the ambitions toe? Was it the relationships toe? What toe did you step on that caused me to push you off? I can't be angry at you unless you did something that specifically hurt or threatened one of my basic instincts for survival. That's it.
There's a saying in AA you often hear, some people say it just because they're talking about people at the meeting, but I look at it for the steps is there's a wrench for every nut, right? And if you look at these instincts, there's a wrench for every nut. There's one of them's there. And but one part that before we get into the inventory here, there's one thing that's really ignored is what says at the top of the page. We're usually as definite as this example, right? Indefinite means this is I get excited when I talk about this because it frustrates me at the same time. Definite means something that's sure or certain or clear, right? And one thing that amazes me is how people can screw up inventory. Um, and it's when we have a definite example on this page. Now, some of you might say when you see how Howard and I do it, um, we might say, well, this is, that's what they're talking about. No, we tried to make it as simple as possible. But when the internet took off in like 2006, I recognized all of a sudden there was, yeah, because I used the Joe and Charlie sheets at that time and still use a variation of them. Um, all of a sudden there's 5 column inventory sheets, there's 6 columns, there's 9 columns, there's 10, 11. It goes on and people swept down its inventory. We have a definite example with clear-cut directions. And a definition I found that's most interesting for definite is something guaranteed that is not going to change. So it's synonymous with words like certain, exact, final, specific, guaranteed, true, indispensable, indisputable, not indispensable, indisputable. But Bill seems like he's trying to tell us something here. This is how it's done. This is how it works. What happens if I change how it works? It's how it doesn't work. And people change the recipe and wonder why they get different results. If you change a cookie recipe, we know what happens. I could go to Howard's house and have the best chocolate chip cookies I've ever had in my life, right? And say, man, I need this recipe. And Kathy says, well, I'll give you the recipe. Here it is. And I take it home. And I said, you know what? She's got too much, she doesn't have enough sugar on here. She doesn't have enough chocolate and this and that and there. I upped the recipe. Well, now I no longer have the best cookies I ever had. I have my own invention. So I get different results and I'm not as satisfied. I want the outcomes promised in this book. And he says the word example. Example is something that's used as what? A model. So when they say example, they're saying this is the model how to follow. It's definite. So I'm going to put up the slide that goes with this just so that, we can get a deep look at it, so to speak, if it matters. I mean, you're probably looking at your book, but um, the definite example, you know, he gives us pretty, I mean, compared to the way inventory has evolved over the years through guys like Joe and Charlie, this goes a little bit deeper, but he's got, Mr. Brown's attention to my wife and, I mean, what does that mean? Does that mean that Mr. Brown actually was getting wife's attention, or did he wave at someone else and he thought he was waving to his wife? I mean, that's what we do. But he's saying it, affected his self-esteem. Did you want to comment on these, Howard?
Yeah, he gives us two different ways to approach this on this page, incidentally. he tells us that we can put the guy's name in column one, and then in column two, we could break down the things that we're angry about. I'm angry because he's attention to my wife. That's one thing. I'm angry that he told my wife of my mistress. That's another thing. And as we move into the next column, we're giving the basic instincts that tie into that specific cause. So his attention to my wife affected sex relations and self-esteem. All right. Now, that's just what Bill was giving us as an example. Joe and Charlie expanded it into a number of other words that, like I said before, you'll find in the 12 and 12, and you'll find in a number of places. But those words, self-esteem, pride, security, ambitions, relationships. So the point is, we can attack each cause and look at what was affected by it separately, or in the next example, in Mrs. Jones, and I know I'm jumping ahead here, is a list of things. She's a nut, she stumped me, she committed her husband, she's my friend, she's a gossip. All of those things come together, and then what's affected? Personal relationships, self-esteem. So you can break it down into individuals, or you could clump it all together. There's no such thing as a wrong answer here. But you got to be brief. That second column has to be brief. And the suggestion I'm going to make is think about the fact that the more you write in column two, the more you get into justification and rationalization. Don't describe anything. What happened? Period.
Oops. Sorry. Um, so I mean, it has really good examples here. I just be, I'm gonna um I'm gonna talk about the way that before I talk about the way Howard and I do inventory, um I want to talk a little bit about he mentioned Joe and Charlie. And when the big book was released, it took years for members to truly embrace what's going on in it, and Um, but in this guys, Joe McQueen and Charlie Parmley, they met at an Al-Anon convention, and Charlie was the speaker, and Joe was there with his wife, and they had common interests in the big book. They basically fell in love with each other and started their own big book study. I don't want to tell the whole long thing, but they consider themselves big book fundamentalists, self-proclaimed, and all they wanted to do was a simple approach that would make everything work for them and get their sponsees doing it right. In the early 80s, they were the main speaker of a AA convention, a small convention, but speaking back to back, wasn't really what they wanted to do. They decided to speak together. And that wasn't done before, but someone recorded them, blew the crowd away, and their tape slowly started to circulate to the fellowship. And it sparked invitations for them to go around the country and give that presentation. And then they said, we're getting a crowd. Let's keep moving with this. And, these guys had a way of talking and representing the big book that everyone can understand. Kindergarten, simple kindergarten language. They made the big book come alive and breaking it down to pieces. And my grand sponsor, they took the four step from 65 and they put it in a graph, which I'll show you the one that I use, and truly changed not, you know, not only how the steps, are looked at, but they changed, AA got turned on its ear. The AA was on fire, and my grand sponsor pushed these, and they were everywhere when I got sober. Now sometimes you go to meetings and people don't want to talk about them. They just use the graphs and all this. And like I said, when I got sober in 2000, I went to book studies, and they were basically doing Joe and Charlie, and that's what I learned. And it's I think no one had a more significant impact in the AA in the last 50 years, let's say now, than Joe and Charlie. You know, so I'm going to show you the way I do inventory first, and I want to say this: if you do it another way, that we're not saying or if you do it another way than Howard's eyes are slightly different. Um, and perhaps it gives you even deeper understanding. But every sponsor out there uses the book slightly different, and plus we're sponsored lots of guys. We're like mad scientists. We take this stuff and we try to make it not our own invention, but we try to make it so it simplifies it a little bit, you know. So I put together this years ago with a couple other guys called Works Inventory. And I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but we have this essential words for step four. It is definitions and stuff. And then we have the instincts page, which I showed you a while back. And then I have the 65 in here, and I have the inventory sheet. Now, what I'm going to do is, if I can pull it off, I'm just going to put it side by side. And, the structure of it, it runs deeper. But for me, I like to see the instincts in front of me. I like to have a feeling for what those instincts, I got to see it in front of me. I tried it on binder paper, and I'm not against that idea, but once I did these, I couldn't go back and doing any other way. Um, and if that's the way you do it, that's fine. There's no wrong way to do it as long as you do it. And you're not using, I mean, I always say it's as long as it's not some 65 column inventory. Um, I think that this sticks to it as much as possible. But um, all this do an example on here. Let's look at Mr. Brown. And I put his attention to, Mr. Brown's attention to my wife. If someone gave me, think also he's got a bunch of resentments against Mr. Brown. He's got preconceived ideas against Mr. Brown. Did it affect my personal relations with Mr. Brown? Absolutely. And when I do self-esteem for myself and usually my sponsees, I like to market, is my self-esteem high in the situation or is it low? Am I better than Mr. Brown? Or, oh my God, he did it again to me. And we get depressed. Did it affect my pride? Yeah, because my friends are in the room when it happened. Did it affect my emotional security? Yeah. Did it affect my material? Um, Not in this particular resentment. And that's the one thing I don't like to check all the boxes. I got guys that check every box. We're trying to be, sex relations. No, I'm not messing around that way. Uh, did it affect my ambitions, my social ambitions? Yeah, security. And then we'll get into explain the last column. We probably won't get there till next week, but we'll explain the last column later and why mine is, we all have it kind of different. But that's as simple as that. I'll give you a quick example, then I'll let Howard show you my example of his. But I'll give you my dad up here. I'm going to put my resentment against my dad. And what it was my father at a baseball game when he pulled me to the side. I made a mistake and I kind of embarrassed him. And I got mad at him for ripping apart me, whacked me across the mouth, and everyone saw it. And I held on to that for years. And I mean, it runs deeper, and we'll find this out why in the book study, but it really affected my personal relationship with him. But it gave me low self-esteem at the time that would evolve into high self-esteem because I started to not like him. And the pride, there was how many people saw that happen? I want that guy to be my dad, not this monster, and my emotional security and my social ambitions and security ambitions. But like I say, that's not really hard to do, you know. It's not, we're not looking at, rocket science here. We're looking at inventory. So we're kind of, as usual, we're kind of getting low on time. I'm gonna let Howard speak for a minute. I've been blabbing long enough and turn this down and see what he wants to say about how he, looks at inventory. Oh, you're muted.
What Steve just put up there, and I'm going to show you a variation on Joe. What Steve put up there, incidentally, was the original Joe and Charlie uh, grid from when they first started doing it, and they changed it over the years. And interesting, Steve told the story of Joe and Charlie. There's a caveat in that a lot of people may not be aware of. When they were asked to come and do this presentation, and I believe it was the Oklahoma or Arkansas State Convention. I forget which one. They weren't. They recorded it They were told they're recording it, and said they're going to auction off 100 of these tapes. They were going to pick out tickets to give to people from this particular weekend through steps. And the guy who was masterminding this, guy named Wes, who did the recording, he went through the tickets before the event and he picked out people from as far away from that state as he could find. He wanted to get these 100 tapes spread out as far away from this current location as he could. So he fixed the results that the 100 names that were called that got the tapes were called because of where they lived and how far away they were from where that convention was. Just cute. But that grid eventually evolved into this. And I'll show you briefly that it's the exact same thing. First column, I'm resentful at, exactly like you saw on the other list, people, principles, and institutions. What's the cause, right? We're beginning to understand that it's not the people we're angry at so much as the things that they've done to us. We begin to see where anger comes from. So we put down the cause, and then in column 3, just like you saw on the other list, which had little check mark boxes. In this case, we're just going to state which one of these things were affected. My self-esteem, and I defined it at the bottom to make it a little bit easier to follow, because I didn't know self-esteem and pride were two different things. I'm a bit of an idiot. So I had to write down the explanation. Emotional security, general sense of well-being, my ambitions, my ability to do or to accomplish things. Where did the hammer hit me? I'm angry at this person because he did this to me, and this is the basic instinct that was affected. And then where had I been? What mistake did I make? In the column 2, that person did something to me. Let's say he stole from me. And if you remember the example I gave before, he stole from me meant that one of his basic instincts was out of proportion, say his financial instinct or his dishonesty, whatever was out of proportion. So in this last column, we're asking ourselves, did I ever do that to him? Did I ever do that to anybody else? This guy stole from me, and it's because let's say well, he was dishonest. He was selfish. Have I ever been dishonest or selfish towards him? Have I ever been dishonest or selfish towards anyone else? And I know you can pick out a lot more words than just those 7, but I'm a believer in those 7 words because I guarantee any word you come up with, I could bring down to one of those 7. And the fewer words we have to deal with in that last column, the fewer defects we have to work on in the 6th and the 7th step. Because that last column, that's the money column. Those are the exact nature of our wrongs we're going to talk about in 5. Those are the defects of character we talk about in 6. Those are the shortcomings we're going to ask God to remove in 7. When Bill was asked, what's the difference between a wrong in 5 and a defect in 6 and a shortcoming in 7? His answer was simple: none. They all mean the same thing. So let's not try and make more of something that's not there. They all mean the same thing. And it must be important because we are talking about it in 5. We're asking to be freed of it in 6. And we're asking God to take it away from us by showing us a formula for how to become more of the asset than the defect in step 7. So it's the same exact thing you saw in that other list. It's just laid out differently. That's all. One's Coke, one's Pepsi. It says the same thing. That's all. Let me get rid of that. You got to unmute. Now you got to unmute.
Yeah, I got to mute. And here's the thing is if it doesn't represent what's in the book, then it's not what's in the book. Simple as that. And ours represents what's in the book, mine represents what's in the book, you know. And when you start having words that are in the book, I've seen a lot of them that 80% of it does. It's there's a reason why this book hasn't changed at all. You know, and I don't, the only people that I know people that said we got a meeting recently says I tore that page out years ago, and he goes, I never do need to do that crap, and I went, oh well, there you go, you know, and you know, um, Howard, let's go to 67, and we can explain. I'm gonna you know, just put my when I get there, I'll put my sheet up there again. And so, oops, I gotta do something really quick. My
You
computer's
turning to 67 or 66?
we'll come back to to 66 next week, but let's go to
Okay.
67. We're gonna jump ahead just so we can look at that last column they talked about. And um oh, hold on a second, I'm all over the place. Okay. So referring to our list again. So he's asked us, I'm going to put this up here just so that we can have an idea, you know. Um, Referring to our list again, putting all the minds others had done. Um, so that would be the first, the cause. We put our minds others. Can I do that? We resolutely, means to show, determination. Rather look for our own mistakes. So I'm searching for my own mistakes. That is a thought or action that is misguided, wrong. So it's an error, right? Where where had I been selfish? Now I'm going to show you guys something here. Cover up the word where on there and just now read it. Had I been selfish? It leaves its meaning is gone. But the way Bill wrote it. Where have been no one's ever asked that before. Had I been selfish, that's a big difference right there. It means we're looking for a location. So, selfish means tending most of my own needs, a little not thought of others. That's a thought. Where I've been dishonest, acting, lying, stealing, deceiving, you can go on and on. Where I've been self-seeking, that's so if I'm selfish with Howard for resentment, right? Self-seeking is pursuing that selfishness, taking an action. I would either told him off to his face or punched him in the face. You know, where have we been frightened? That's a state of fear, right? Um, we're going to read this paragraph, then we'll come back, and then we'll break it down a little more. But though a situation not been entirely our fault, we try to disregard the person's entirely. Now, here's the thing. Now he's asking us to disregard the person, so I disregard so far he's asking me to disregard the first two columns. Though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we try to disregard the other person involved entirely. Um, let's column one. Where are we to blame? The most unique feature of anger, it insists on blame. It's in our nature, blaming, hold us onto these mistakes. So it tells me that, to seek the weapon of revenge, so to speak. This is why it destroys more alcoholics than anything else. And that's the thing. Howard, you want to comment on that before I keep reading, or?
Well, as long as we're talking about 67, that top paragraph, we ask God to help us show them the same tolerance. The sick man's prayer. I think what that tells me is, can I get down off of my high horse of judgment and put my ego aside? Can I put myself in the shoes of the person that I'm angry at? How were they raised? Was I afraid as they were? Was I as drunk or high as they were? If I had gone on if I had gone on inside me, had I turned out the same way? I've got to disable. I guess what I'm saying is I've got to disable this judgment juggernaut that's myself.
Right.
Albert Einstein said that the greatest illusion mankind has is that there's more than one of us here. I am you, you are me. Every fifth step is the same. I always pray when I take a fifth step, God, let me hear something I haven't heard before.
Right.
That's
Mm.
it.
So where are we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set matters straight. So it tells me to put, out of the mind what the other person did, and it tells me to disregard the other person, whom I resent. By disregarding what the other person, disregarding what they did, what am I left to look at? The effects might call I just don't see what instincts were affected. I see what drove me to selfishness. What those instincts out of balance, misdirected. They're telling a story. They're telling my story. I can see how pride drove me to selfishness, how self-esteem, made it about me, so to speak, or made me frightened. You know, we're trying to live life on self-will, run the show ourselves. And that's the thing. Um, I think I skipped a part here. Um, the inventory is ours, not the other man. We placed them before us in black and white. We're willing, we admitted our wrongs honestly and willing to set matters straight. So they're talking about nine there. But the thing is the fourth column is the end result of a life, that's driven by instincts. You know, we send, we must send blame out here. you know, just give, I mean, that's the way we're taught. Now we need to get it out of our lives and we must let it go. And you see on my sheets is I got selfish and frightened on here, not a list of all of them. And the reason being is I'll talk about it next week briefly. I do a harm inventory and I got self-seeking and dishonest and stuff like that on there. Um, I one thing is a lot of places put such a huge, I think they overemphasize the fourth column. And I think that third column is kind of left in the cold. Um, I think there's so much that goes with it, you know. Um, and here's the thing is, and I'll let Howard talk, is so many people never get past column two. Most people in their life will never get past column, what the person did. And they'll spend, they'll die at 90 years old or 60 years old, stuck in that column, never moving past it. We have a way where we can move past it and be free. That's the most important thing. And one way I want to say this is another way to look at the four columns is why do I have this as a pleasure? Why do the people do real? I mean, what do the people do, real or fancy, to give me that displeasure? What drives me to that displeasure, and what's the end results of that? What's the reoccurring, feeling of displeasure? What drove me to that? Howard?
Yeah. You could take it down. It's okay. Um, let me just wrap up with this. I've been asked, where did you get this shit from? Where
So
do you get this fourth column from? On page 65, it shows us three columns. It doesn't show us four columns. Where do you guys cook up this fourth column? I cooked it up. I didn't cook it up. I got it because I know how to read. On page 67, it tells us, referring back to our list again. So we go back to the list a few pages ago that had three columns. We put out of mind the stuff that other people did to us, which means we put out of mind columns one, two, and three. And then we resolutely look for our own mistakes. Where had we been selfish, dishonest? These are specific questions that weren't asked in the first three columns. And then he tells us we listed them when we saw those defects, when we saw our faults, we listed them. We put them before us in black and white. That's where the fourth column comes from. It gives us very specific instructions right here for that fourth column. There's no need to give us an illustration. He tells us what to do. That's all.
One thing I want to say before we close here, so we're around time. If your shirt's torn, you don't sit there and continue to wear it. You disregard it without regret. It's never worn again. Or if a chair is broken, if Howard's office chair breaks, he's not going to sit there and be crooked in his chair. You know, it no longer works for him. And we need to do the same thing with resentments. We need to locate and look at it, and so we can get to 6 and 7. It's all a route to 6 and 7. I mean, so we can have the ability to let God remove this stuff. And when we become aware that our life is driven by instincts, we receive something called humility. In other words, allowing our instincts, to guide us, not allowing our instincts to guide us is the absence of, I mean, I'm sorry, being stuck in misdirected instincts is the absence of humility. So, facing and admitting, admitting this stuff is the beginning of a practice of humility, and it's going to go all the way, through those steps. And the ultimate practice of humility is letting go, letting God guide us. And imagine a step. I always say this before. Imagine if step 3 was step 6. How many things would we admit to? You know, and instead he he had to make a decision, and then he came up with a graph or whatever, however we do it, to put all this stuff down.
Mm.
If you ask someone to admit something, you know, I mean, this is deep. I mean, if I'm not gonna leave a piece of raw meat in the counter and eat it the next day. It's contaminated. I want to discard it. We need to do the same thing here, you know, and this is, gone long enough. And I'm going to paraphrase this, but one of my good friends used to say this: examine your thoughts because they become your words. Be honest with your words they become your actions. Know your actions because they define your character. It is your character that defines you and propels you to greatness. It's a good character result of hard work. That's the thing. So I'm gonna stop the recording, and we'll go back to where we were last, where we left off this week, next week.